Imagine, you've been married for 20 years to a billionaire tech mogul. You've raised his children, built a life together, and then, on your wedding anniversary, in a crowded five-star restaurant, he looks you in the eye and slaps you. That single moment sets off a chain of events: hidden mistresses, secret bank accounts, even a second marriage he never told you about. This isn't just a divorce story. It's a high-stakes war of lies, power, and survival, where the victim refuses to stay silent. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see how one woman turned the worst night of her life into the greatest victory imaginable. And hey, if you love true stories filled with shocking twists and ultimate justice, make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, share this video, and subscribe so you don't miss the next jaw-dropping tale. The gentle clink of champagne glasses and soft murmur of conversation filled La Bernardin's private dining room. But Margaret Davidson heard none of it. Her attention was fixed on her husband of 20 years, who sat across from her, scrolling through his phone with the same intensity he once reserved for her. "Richard, please put your phone down," Margaret said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's our 20-year anniversary." Richard Davidson, billionaire tech mogul and founder of Davidson Industries, didn't even glance up. His fingers continued their relentless dance across the screen, his jaw tight with concentration. "Richard," Margaret tried again, reaching across the white tablecloth to touch his hand. He pulled away sharply. "I'm handling something important. Margaret, give me a minute." The waitress approached, her practiced smile bright. "The champagne you ordered, Mr. Davidson, Dom Perignon, 1996. Shall I pour?" "Yes, fine," Richard muttered, still not looking up. Margaret watched the golden liquid fill her glass, bubbles rising like her unspoken questions. She was 52 years old, had raised 2 children, supported Richard through his company's early struggles, and somehow she felt more alone than ever. When had their marriage become this hollow performance? Richard's phone buzzed with an incoming text. His entire demeanor shifted, his eyes widened. Color drained from his face, then rushed back in a wave of red. His fingers gripped the phone so tightly Margaret thought it might crack. "Who's texting you at 10 at night?" Margaret asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the knot forming in her stomach. Richard's head snapped up, his gray eyes blazing with an anger she'd rarely seen directed at her. "What did you just say? I asked who was texting you. It's a simple question." "Richard, don't you dare question me. Margaret!" His voice was low, dangerous. "I built an empire while you played housewife. You live in luxury because of my work, my sacrifices. And you have the audacity to interrogate me about my business." Margaret felt her cheeks burn. "Playing housewife, I raised our children. I managed our homes. I stood by you through everything." "Stood by me?" Richard laughed, harsh and bitter. "You rode on my coattails. Without me, you're nothing. A middle-aged woman with no career, no accomplishments. Nothing but the clothes I bought you and the house I pay for." The words stung, but Margaret had heard variations of them before. Usually when Richard had been drinking. What happened next, however, was new. "I saw the text notification," Margaret said quietly. "It said, 'Can't wait to see you tonight, baby.' That doesn't sound like business to me." The slap came so fast Margaret didn't have time to flinch. Richard's palm connected with her cheek with a crack that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent restaurant. Margaret's hand flew to her face, tears springing to her eyes more from shock than pain. "Mrs. Davidson, are you all right?" The manager rushed over, his face pale with concern. Other diners stared, some with phones half raised. Margaret stood slowly, with a dignity she didn't feel. Her cheek throbbed, but her voice was steady. "I'm leaving, Richard, and this time, I'm not coming back." Richard's face cycled through emotions, rage, surprise, then a calculating coldness. "You walk out that door, and you get nothing. Remember the prenup? Margaret, abandonment voids everything." "Abandonment?" Margaret's laugh was hollow. "You just assaulted me in front of 30 witnesses." She turned to the manager. "Please call me a cab." As she walked toward the door, she heard Richard's voice behind her, suddenly pleading. "Margaret, wait. You're overreacting. It was just, she didn't stop. She'd spent 20 years stopping, 20 years accepting apologies, 20 years believing things would get better. Her millionaire ex-husband, because that's what he would be, she decided in that moment had finally shown his true face in public. 3 hours later, in their Manhattan penthouse, Margaret stood in her walk-in closet pulling clothes from hangers with mechanical precision. Her hands shook slightly as she folded each item, placing them in the Louis Vuitton suitcases Richard had bought her for their 10th anniversary. 20 years, she said aloud to the empty room. 20 years of my life. She picked up a framed photo from her dresser their wedding day. Richard looked handsome and confident. She looked young and hopeful. Neither of them could have imagined it would end with violence in a restaurant full of strangers. The penthouse door slammed. Heavy footsteps on marble floors announced Richard's arrival before his voice did. Maggie, sweetheart, you know I didn't mean it. He appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, his expression carefully contrite. I've been under so much stress with the merger. You know how I get when I'm stressed? Margaret didn't look at him, continuing to pack. Stress doesn't give you the right to hit me. Richard. Hit you? Come on, it was barely a tap. You're being dramatic. He moved closer, his cologne Tom Ford. She'd bought it for him, filling the space between them. Look, I'm sorry. Okay, it won't happen again. Margaret's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Victoria Chen, her attorney friend from college. Don't answer that, Richard said quickly. Margaret answered. Victoria. Margaret, I heard what happened. James Morrison was at the restaurant. He called me. Are you safe? I'm at the penthouse. Packing? Margaret replied, watching Richard's face darken. Victoria's voice was crisp, professional. I'm recording this call. Can you repeat what happened tonight? Richard slapped me at La Bernardin during our anniversary dinner, in front of the entire restaurant. Did you document the injury? Margaret looked in the mirror. A faint red mark still colored her cheek. I will. Good. Don't leave the penthouse tonight. That could be construed as abandonment under New York law. I'll be there first thing in the morning. Richard, if you're listening, I suggest you sleep in the guest room. Richard grabbed for the phone, but Margaret stepped back. She's right here, Victoria. And he just tried to take my phone. Richard, Victoria's voice was steel. If you touch her again, I'll have you arrested. Margaret, lock your bedroom door. I'll see you at 8 a.m. After Victoria hung up, Richard's mask of contrition slipped. You called a lawyer for this, Margaret. You're overreacting. You accused me of cheating, then hit me when I asked about a suspicious text. Who's overreacting? Richard's jaw clenched. That text was nothing. A client. A client who calls you baby. She's informal. Young. You know how these tech people are? Margaret almost laughed. She'd heard so many excuses over the years, but this was particularly weak. As she continued packing, something caught her eye, a receipt on Richard's dresser. She picked it up. Cartier. $42,000. Dated last Tuesday, her birthday. Richard, she said slowly, you gave me a bracelet from Tiffany for my birthday. He barely glanced over. So, this is a receipt for Cartier jewelry. Same day. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Richard shrugged. It was for a client, a closing gift. Margaret looked at the receipt more carefully. Diamond bracelet, engraved with Forever, R. That's quite a closing gift. Richard snatched the receipt from her hand. You're paranoid. This is exactly why things have been difficult. You question everything. I'm questioning things because you're lying to me. Margaret zipped her suitcase closed. I'll be in the guest room. Don't follow me. As she wheeled her suitcase down the hall, Richard called after her. You leave me. You get nothing. Margaret, nothing. The prenup is ironclad. She paused at the guest room door. We'll see about that. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Margaret's mood as she sat in Victoria Chen's corner office overlooking Madison Avenue. Victoria, immaculate in a charcoal suit, poured coffee from a French press while Margaret recounted the previous evening in detail. Margaret, in my 30 years of practice, I've seen this pattern, Victoria said, her voice gentle but firm. The accusation is usually a confession. When a spouse suddenly becomes paranoid about infidelity, They're usually the one cheating, Margaret finished. I know. I think I've known for a while. I just didn't want to see it. Margaret's phone buzzed. Emily's photo appeared on the screen, her daughter, 23 and fresh out of Columbia Law. Hi, sweetheart, Margaret answered. Mom, Dad's been acting weird for months, Emily said without preamble. There's something you should know. Margaret put the phone on speaker with a questioning look at Victoria, who nodded. Go ahead. Remember when I surprised Dad at the Ritz-Carlton last month? He said he was in a board meeting, but I saw him in the lobby with some woman. Young, maybe late 20s. They looked intimate. Margaret's stomach dropped. Why didn't you tell me? I convinced myself it was business. But Mom, I've seen them together 3 times now. Different hotel, always during his supposed business trips. Victoria leaned forward. Emily, this is Victoria Chen. Did you take any photos? Hi, Victoria. Yes, I did. I felt guilty, but something seemed off. I'll send them to Mom now. After Emily hung up, Margaret's phone pinged with incoming messages. The photos were clear, Richard with a young blonde woman, his hand on her lower back, leaning close to whisper in her ear, sharing champagne in a hotel bar. All those late-night conferences in Tokyo, Margaret said quietly. Richard's company doesn't even have a Tokyo office anymore. They closed it 2 years ago. Victoria studied the photos. This is good evidence, but we need more. The prenup has an infidelity clause, correct? Yes, but it works both ways. If I cheated, I get nothing. If he cheated, Margaret paused. Actually, I'm not sure what happens if he cheated. We need to review that document carefully. But first, I want to bring in someone who can help us build a complete picture. Victoria picked up her desk phone. Sarah, can you come to my office? I have a client who needs your expertise. 20 minutes later, Sarah Williams entered, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of quiet confidence. After introductions, she got straight to business. Mrs. Davidson, men like your husband always leave digital footprints, Sarah said, pulling out a tablet. Give me 72 hours wire and I'll have everything you need. Credit card records, hotel bookings, phone records if we can get them legally, the works. Is that legal? Margaret asked. If the accounts are joint, absolutely. You have every right to review financial records from your marriage. Sarah made notes on her tablet. Now, has he exhibited any unusual behavior recently? New passwords, secret phones, unexplained expenses. Margaret thought back. He changed all his passwords about 6 months ago, said it was for security after some data breach, and there have been charges on our American Express that he claimed were client entertainment, but they were at jewelry stores, high-end restaurants, places like that. Classic, Sarah muttered. What about his emotional behavior? More critical of you, picking fights. Yes, Margaret said slowly. He's been incredibly critical. My appearance, my friends, how I spend my time, and the fights. He seems to start them deliberately, then storms out. Victoria and Sarah exchanged knowing looks. He's building a case, Victoria said, making you look like the difficult spouse so when he files for divorce, he can claim irreconcilable differences caused by your behavior. Margaret's phone rang again. The caller ID showed Linda Patterson, her friend from the country club. Margaret, honey, are you sitting down? Linda's Texas drawl was more pronounced when she was upset. What is it? Linda. Sugar. The whole country club is talking. Richard's been seen with someone young enough to be his daughter. They were at the golf course last week, and honey, the way she was hanging on him was not professional. Margaret closed her eyes. How long has this been going on? Word is about 6 months, maybe more. That man's been playing you like a fiddle. Sugar. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I didn't know how. After Margaret hung up, she looked at Victoria and Sarah. 6 months. He's been planning this for 6 months while making me feel like I was losing my mind. Gaslighting, Sarah said. It's psychological abuse, and it's often a precursor to physical violence, which already happened last night. Margaret touched her cheek unconsciously. The mark had faded, but the memory remained sharp. Victoria stood. Margaret, I need you to go home and act normally for now. Don't confront Richard with what we know. Let Sarah do her work. Can you do that? I've been pretending everything was fine for years, Margaret said with bitter humor. What's a few more days? As she prepared to leave, Sarah stopped her. Mrs. Davidson, this is important. Document everything. Every conversation. Every strange charge on the credit cards. Every time he says he's going somewhere. Email it all to Victoria. We're building a case that will make your millionaire ex-husband wish he'd never raised his hand to you. Margaret nodded, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, hope. 3 days later, Margaret sat in her kitchen at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep. Richard was supposedly in Boston for a conference, but she'd called the hotel and they had no reservation under his name. She'd been documenting everything as Sarah instructed, and the pattern was becoming undeniable. Her phone vibrated. Sarah Williams. I'm sending you something, Sarah said without preamble. Sit down first. Margaret's laptop dinged with an encrypted email. She opened it to find an audio file. This is from his office voicemail system, Sarah explained. He thought he was being clever using the office line, but he forgot that corporate voicemails are archived. Margaret clicked play. Richard's voice filled her kitchen, but the words were meant for someone else. Baby, she doesn't suspect anything. The divorce papers are ready. Once I prove she's cheating, you get everything. The prenup guarantees it. Just be patient. A few more weeks and we'll be together permanently. Love you. Ashley. Margaret's hand shook. That's from 3 months ago. There's more, Sarah said gently. I found evidence of at least 3 affairs over the past 5 years. The current one, Ashley Morrison, is 28. She's an influencer he met at a tech conference. Margaret pulled up Ashley's Instagram. Beautiful, blonde, with nearly 1 million followers. Her recent posts showed expensive jewelry, trips to Paris, Dubai, all places Richard had supposedly gone for business. He's been planning this, Margaret said, her voice hollow. The jealousy act is projection. Classic narcissistic abuse pattern, Sarah confirmed. I'm sending everything to Victoria. But Margaret, there's something else. I found payments to a private investigator. He's been having you followed. Margaret's blood ran cold. For the past 2 months, he's trying to catch you doing anything that could be construed as infidelity. Even having coffee with a male friend could be twisted in court. The next morning, Victoria called an emergency meeting. Margaret arrived to find not just Victoria and Sarah, but also Michael Torres, a forensic accountant. We've uncovered something significant, Victoria began. Michael opened his laptop. Mr. Davidson has been moving money offshore for years, specifically to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. We're talking about approximately $30 million that should be marital assets. $30 million, Margaret gasped. Conservative estimate, he's been hiding assets since year 5 of your marriage. Every time he got a bonus or stock option, he'd report half and hide the rest. Victoria leaned forward. This is fraud, Margaret, not just against you, but potentially against the IRS. Your husband isn't just a cheater, he's a criminal. Margaret's phone rang. Emily. Mom, where are you? At Victoria's office. Why? What's wrong? Dad just called me. He says you're having a mental breakdown and he wants me to convince you to seek help. He's saying you attacked him at the restaurant. Margaret laughed bitterly. He hit me, Emily, in front of 30 witnesses. I know, Mom. I believe you. But he's calling everyone David, Grandma, all your friends. He's trying to control the narrative. After Emily hung up, Victoria's expression was grim. He's escalating. We need to move faster. That evening, Margaret returned home to find Richard waiting in the living room, a glass of scotch in hand. Where were you? He demanded. Shopping, Margaret lied smoothly. Nordstrom was having a sale. Richard studied her. Linda Patterson called, said she told you some ridiculous gossip about me and some young woman. She mentioned something, Margaret said casually, hanging up her coat. I didn't pay much attention. You know how Linda exaggerates? Richard relaxed slightly. Exactly. These bored housewives with nothing better to do than spread rumors. Margaret bit her tongue. Linda ran a successful real estate business and was hardly a bored housewife. I'm thinking we should take a vacation. Richard said suddenly. Maybe the Maldives. Work on us. Warning bells rang in Margaret's head. An isolated location. No witnesses. That sounds lovely, she said instead. When were you thinking? Next week. I'll have my assistant book it. Margaret smiled. Perfect. I'll start packing. As she headed upstairs, Richard called after her. Margaret, I'm sorry about the other night. You know I love you. Right. She turned, meeting his eyes. Of course, Richard. But as she climbed the stairs, she texted Victoria. He wants to take me to the Maldives next week. Isolated location. I'm scared. Victoria's response was immediate. Don't go. We file tomorrow. The next evening, Margaret sat at the Four Seasons Hotel bar, nursing a club soda and watching the entrance. Sarah's intelligence indicated Richard and Ashley met here every Thursday when he was supposedly at his poker game. At 8:15, they walked in together. Ashley Morrison was even more striking in person, tall, elegant, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been made to feel small. Richard's hand rested possessively on her lower back as he guided her to a corner booth. Margaret positioned herself where she could hear their conversation, hidden behind a decorative partition. When will you tell her about us? Ashley's voice was young, impatient. Soon, baby. I just need her to slip up once. One text from another man, and she loses everything in the prenup. It's been 3 months since you filed the papers? Richard, I'm tired of hiding. Margaret's breath caught. He'd already filed. The process takes time, Richard soothed. But think about the payoff. 50 million, all ours, the houses, the yacht, everything. I don't care about the money, Ashley said. I just want to be with you. Richard laughed. Come on, sweetheart. You didn't fall for a broke nobody. You fell for Richard Davidson, billionaire. The money is part of the package. There was a pause, then Ashley spoke again, her voice smaller. Sometimes I wonder if you'd have noticed me if I wasn't young and pretty. You're overthinking. Have some more champagne. Margaret had heard enough. She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked directly to their table. Richard, Ashley, is it? Richard's face went white, then red. Ashley's eyes widened in shock. Margaret, this is a business meeting. Richard stammered. Ashley's nervous laugh cut through his words. Mr. Davidson, you said she was in the Hamptons. Margaret smiled coolly. Oh, I was. But I came back to collect what's mine. She turned to Ashley. You might want to ask him about Jennifer, his Tuesday girlfriend, or Patricia, who gets Wednesdays. You're just the Thursday girl. Honey, that's not… Ashley turned to Richard. What is she talking about? She's lying, Richard said quickly, but his face betrayed him. Am I? Margaret pulled out her phone, showing Ashley a photo Sarah had obtained. This was Tuesday, Richard and Jennifer at 11 Madison Park. Ashley stood abruptly, tears in her eyes. You said I was the only one. You said you loved me. Baby, wait. Richard reached for her, but she pulled away. Don't. I'm such an idiot. She looked at Margaret. I'm sorry. He told me you were separated, that you were cruel to him, that… I know what he told you, Margaret said gently. He's very convincing, but now you know the truth. Security arrived as Richard's voice rose. This is harassment. I'll have your lawyer disbarred. Sir, we need you to calm down, the security guard said firmly. Margaret walked away, Ashley beside her. In the lobby, the younger woman stopped. He's been paying my rent, Ashley said quietly. My car payments. I quit my job because he said he'd take care of me. Margaret studied her. Despite everything, she felt sympathy for this young woman who'd been caught in Richard's web. Get a lawyer, Margaret advised. Document everything. You might have a case for fraud. Ashley nodded, mascara streaking her cheeks. I have recordings. He didn't know, but I recorded some of our conversations. Insurance? You know. Margaret's pulse quickened. Would you be willing to share those with my attorney? After what I just learned? Absolutely. They exchanged numbers, and Ashley hurried out into the night. Margaret was about to leave when Richard appeared, his face twisted with rage. You've ruined everything, he snarled, grabbing her arm. Let go of me, Richard. You think you're so clever you just violated the prenup? Harassment of my business associates. Margaret pulled free. Your mistress isn't a business associate, and I have witnesses to you grabbing me just now. The security guard approached again. Ma'am, are you all right? Yes, thank you. I was just leaving. As she walked away, Richard called after her. You'll get nothing, Margaret. Nothing. She didn't turn around. She already had everything she needed. Monday morning brought a new crisis. Margaret stood at the Chase Bank counter. Her credit card declined, watching the teller's apologetic expression. I'm sorry, Mrs. Davidson, but all your accounts have been frozen. That's impossible. Those are joint accounts. The teller typed rapidly. The freeze was initiated by Mr. Richard Davidson on Friday. As the primary account holder, he has that authority. Margaret's hands shook as she called Victoria, putting her on speaker. He's trying to starve you out, Victoria said immediately. But he just made a fatal mistake. Joint accounts can't be unilaterally frozen when divorce proceedings are pending. We filed Friday morning. This is financial abuse. What am I supposed to do? I have no access to money. I'm calling the judge. We'll have an emergency hearing today. Margaret left the bank feeling humiliated. 52 years old, a millionaire's wife, and she couldn't buy a cup of coffee. Her phone rang. Emily. Mom, I have my trust fund, Emily said immediately. Grandma made sure Dad couldn't touch it. Let me help. No, sweetheart, I'm going to beat him at his own game. Mom, this isn't about pride. It's not pride. It's principle. Your father thinks he can break me by cutting off money. But I'm not broken. I'm angry. That afternoon, Margaret sat in Judge Patricia Hammond's chambers with Victoria, while Richard and his attorney, Charles Whitman, occupied the other side of the conference table. Your Honor, Whitman began, my client was protecting marital assets from potential dissipation by freezing accounts and leaving his wife of 20 years without access to funds. Judge Hammond's expression was stern. Mr. Davidson, did you freeze these accounts? I was advised to protect our assets, Richard said smoothly. That wasn't my question. Did you freeze the accounts? Yes. After being served with divorce papers, Richard's jaw tightened. Yes. Mr. Davidson, that constitutes financial abuse and contempt of court. The accounts will be unfrozen immediately, and you'll pay Mrs. Davidson's legal fees for this emergency hearing. Your Honor, Whitman protested, my client has concerns about his wife's mental state. Victoria stood. Is counsel seriously suggesting mental instability? We have 30 witnesses to Mr. Davidson physically assaulting my client at La Bernardin. Judge Hammond's eyes narrowed. Physical assault. He slapped her, Your Honor, in public. We have video evidence from security cameras. The judge turned to Richard. Is this true? It was a misunderstanding, Richard said quickly. A tap. Really? She's exaggerating. A tap. Judge Hammond's voice was ice. Mr. Davidson, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order. You're to stay 500 feet away from your wife, except for scheduled mediation sessions. This is ridiculous, Richard exploded. She's my wife. Your soon-to-be ex-wife, the judge corrected. And if you violate this order, you'll be arrested. Are we clear? After the hearing, Michael Torres was waiting in Victoria's office with Sarah Williams. We found something huge, Michael said without preamble. Your husband has been paying $15,000 a month to a woman named Patricia Newcomb for the past 15 years. Margaret frowned. I don't know that name. Sarah pulled up a file on her laptop. Patricia Newcomb has a 15-year-old son named Christopher. Birth certificate lists father as unknown, but the timing, the payments. Margaret's world tilted. He has another child. DNA test pending, but the financial evidence is clear. He's been supporting them since the child was born, Margaret calculated quickly. Our son David is 17. Richard was cheating on me while I was pregnant. It appears so, Sarah said gently. Margaret stood abruptly, rage flooding through her. I need air. On the terrace, overlooking Manhattan, Margaret called Emily. Mom, what's wrong? Your father has another child, a 15-year-old boy. He's been paying support for 15 years. Silence, then Emily's voice, cold and hard. I'll kill him. No, sweetheart. We're going to do something worse. We're going to expose him for exactly what he is. That evening, Margaret returned to the penthouse to pack more belongings. Richard wasn't supposed to be there. The restraining order required him to stay at his office apartment, but his car was in the garage. She texted Victoria, "He's here, violating the order. Don't go in. I'm calling the police." But Margaret was done being afraid. She walked in, recording on her phone. Richard was in his study, documents spread across his desk. He looked up, surprised. "You're supposed to be gone," he said. "This is still my home. You're the one violating the restraining order." He stood, moving toward her. "We need to talk about this rationally." "Stay back. Richard, I'm recording this." He stopped, his face darkening. "You've destroyed everything. My reputation, my relationship with Ashley. You mean your mistress, one of several? We could have done this quietly. Now everyone knows our business. Everyone knows you hit me. There's a difference." Police sirens wailed outside. Richard's face went pale. "You called the cops. You're violating a restraining order." Two officers appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Davidson, we need you to come with us." "This is my house," Richard protested. "Sir, there's a restraining order in effect. You need to leave now, or we'll arrest you." As they escorted him out, Richard turned back. "You'll regret this, Margaret. I'll destroy you in court." Margaret met his gaze steadily. "You already tried to destroy me." "Richard, it didn't work." Over the next week, Richard's campaign to discredit Margaret intensified. It started subtly whispers at the country club, concerned calls from mutual friends, suggestions that Margaret was going through something. Thursday afternoon, Margaret walked into the country club for her regular lunch with the charity committee. The conversation stopped when she entered. "Margaret, dear," said Constance Whitmore, the board president. "Richard called us. He's concerned about your mental health." "He says you're struggling," added Patricia Hobbs. "Perhaps you should take a leave from the committee." Margaret set down her purse slowly. "Richard is concerned about my mental health, the man who slapped me in public." "He said that was a misunderstanding," Constance said carefully. "That you've been drinking?" Margaret laughed. "Interesting. I haven't had a drink in 10 years. As you all know, I've been sober since my mother's death." Linda Patterson entered the room like a force of nature. "Y'all are believing a man who just slapped his wife in public. Have you lost your minds?" "Linda, you don't understand," Patricia began. "I understand plenty. Sugar. Richard Davidson is a narcissistic abuser who's trying to gaslight his wife, and y'all are helping him." The door opened again. Richard walked in, his expression a mask of concern. "Margaret, you're embarrassing yourself. Let me take you home." "You're violating the restraining order," Margaret said calmly. "What restraining order, sweetheart? You're confused. There's no restraining order." Margaret pulled out her phone, showing the legal document. 500 feet. "Richard." His mask slipped for a moment, rage flashing in his eyes, before the concern returned. "Ladies, you see what I'm dealing with. She's delusional. The only delusion here is you thinking you can manipulate everyone," Margaret said. She looked at the committee. "Check the court records. Check the video from La Bernardin. Then decide who's lying." Security arrived. Linda had called them. "Mr. Davidson, you need to leave," the security chief said. As Richard was escorted out, several committee members pulled out their phones. Within minutes, the video from La Bernardin was playing on multiple screens. "Oh my God," Constance whispered. "He really did hit you. And now he's trying to make me look crazy," Margaret said. "Classic narcissistic abuse tactic." Patricia Hobbs looked stricken. "Margaret, I'm so sorry. We should have believed you." "He's very convincing," Margaret said. "I believed him for 20 years. That evening, Margaret's phone rang constantly, friends apologizing, offering support, expressing shock. The narrative was shifting, but Richard wasn't done. Friday morning brought a new crisis. Margaret woke to find her photo on the gossip blog Manhattan Wives. "Billionaire's wife in mental health crisis," screamed the headline. The article, clearly planted by Richard, painted Margaret as an unstable alcoholic who'd attacked her husband in a jealous rage. It mentioned her multiple stays in rehab she'd been once, 10 years ago, her violent temper completely fabricated, And her obsession with younger women projection at its finest? Victoria called immediately. We're suing for defamation. This is clearly Richard's work. How do we prove it? Sarah's already on it. The blogger received a large payment from an LLC traced to Richard's attorney. Margaret's daughter Emily arrived at the penthouse an hour later, furious. I'm going to destroy him, Emily said. I'm a lawyer now. Mom, let me help. You're too emotionally involved. Sweetheart, he's attacking you publicly. He's trying to humiliate you. Margaret hugged her daughter. And he's failing. The truth is coming out. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Ashley Morrison called. Margaret, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I have something you need to hear. They met at a small cafe downtown. Ashley looked different, older somehow, the glossy confidence replaced by something more authentic. I recorded everything, Ashley said, sliding a USB drive across the table. 3 months of conversations. Richard talking about you, about his plans, about the other women. Why are you helping me? Ashley stirred her coffee. Because I was you. In a way, he made me feel special, then slowly tore me down, made me question myself, made me feel crazy. I'm 28 and he had me believing I was worthless without him. I can't imagine enduring that for 20 years. Margaret listened to some of the recordings on Ashley's phone. Richard's voice, casual and cruel. Margaret's pathetic, 52 and still thinking she's attractive. Once I prove she's unstable, I get everything. The prenup is bulletproof if she's deemed mentally incompetent. I've been building this case for 2 years. Every fight recorded, every outburst documented. Margaret's hands trembled. 2 years, Ashley nodded. He showed me files, videos of arguments where he'd provoked you, then only recorded your response. Documents where he'd tracked your spending to make it look excessive. He even hired actors to flirt with you at parties, hoping you'd respond. Actors. That man at the gallery opening last month, the one who kept complimenting you, Richard paid him $5,000 to try to seduce you. Margaret remembered a charming younger man who'd been oddly persistent. She'd politely declined his advances, feeling uncomfortable. This is insane, Margaret said. This is Richard, Ashley corrected. He plans everything, except he didn't plan on you fighting back. Sarah Williams called an emergency meeting Monday morning. Margaret arrived at Victoria's office to find the entire team assembled. Victoria, Sarah, Michael Torres, and a new face. This is James Morrison, Victoria introduced. He was at La Bernardin that night, and he's been investigating Richard professionally for the past year. James, a distinguished man in his 60s, shook Margaret's hand. I'm a forensic analyst for the SEC. We've been watching your husband's company for suspected insider trading. Margaret sank into a chair. Insider trading. Among other things. But that's not why I'm here today. Sarah asked me to look into something, and what I found, well, it changes everything. Sarah opened her laptop. Remember I mentioned Richard had hired a private investigator to follow you? Well, we hacked into the PI's files. Is that legal? Margaret asked. The PI was using illegal methods, hacking your phone, accessing your medical records. We were able to retrieve his files through perfectly legal means during discovery. Victoria's smile was sharp. What we found was illuminating. James pulled up a document. The investigator found nothing incriminating about you. Margaret, nothing. But he did find something about Richard. The document showed a birth certificate. Christopher Newcomb, born 15 years ago. Father Richard Davidson. We already knew about this child, Margaret said. Yes, but look at this. James pulled up another document. Marriage certificate. Richard Davidson and Patricia Newcomb, married in Vegas 16 years ago. Margaret's world stopped. What, your marriage to Richard is technically bigamous, Victoria said softly. He never divorced Patricia. He's been married to both of you for 15 years. That's impossible. We file taxes together. We have joint property. All fraudulent, James said. He's been filing false documents for 15 years. That's federal crime territory. Margaret stood, pacing to the window. He has another wife, another family. Had, Sarah corrected. Patricia filed for divorce 5 years ago. Richard paid her $10 million to keep quiet and disappear. $10 million? Margaret turned. From our marital assets? Yes, he essentially stole $10 million from you to pay off his other wife. Victoria was already pulling up legal documents. This voids everything. Margaret, the prenup, his claims, everything. Bigamy is a felony in New York. He's looking at prison time. Does Patricia know about me? Margaret asked. She does now. Sarah contacted her yesterday. She's willing to testify. Margaret's phone rang. Richard. Don't answer, Victoria warned, but Margaret was done hiding. She answered on speaker. You've ruined me. Richard's voice was slurred. He'd been drinking. The SEC is investigating. The board is calling for my resignation. You've destroyed everything I built. You destroyed it yourself. Richard, I just exposed it. I'll kill you. The words hung in the air. You hear me? I'll kill you before I let you take everything. Victoria was already recording. Richard, this is Victoria Chen. You just made a death threat. The police are being notified. The line went dead. Within an hour, Richard was arrested at his office. The charges, criminal threatening, bigamy, fraud, and violation of a restraining order. Bail was set at $2 million. Margaret watched the news coverage from Victoria's office. Richard being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage. The headline scrolled across the screen. Tech billionaire arrested for bigamy and fraud. Her phone buzzed with messages, friends, family, even strangers expressing support. The narrative had completely shifted. She was no longer the crazy wife. She was the victim of elaborate criminal deception. David, her 17-year-old son, called from boarding school. Mom, I saw the news. Is it true Dad has another family? Yes, sweetheart. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. I'm not sorry. I'm proud of you for standing up to him. He's been a bully my whole life. I just never thought he was capable of this. That evening, Margaret met Patricia Newcomb at a quiet restaurant in Brooklyn. Patricia was younger than Margaret but looked older, tired, worn down. I was 25 when I met him, Patricia said. He swept me off my feet. The secret wedding in Vegas felt romantic. Then he said he needed to keep it quiet for business reasons. When did you find out about me? About 5 years ago. Christopher found photos online of Richard with another family. You, your children. I confronted him, and he admitted everything. Why didn't you come forward? Patricia's laugh was bitter. He threatened to take Christopher, said he'd prove I was an unfit mother, that I'd never see my son again. So I took the money and ran. But you're here now, because my son is old enough to choose where he lives. And because what Richard did to you, no one deserves that. Margaret reached across the table, taking Patricia's hand. We're going to stop him, together. 6 weeks later, Margaret sat in the New York Supreme Court, her family behind her, facing Richard across the courtroom. He'd lost weight, his designer suit hanging loose, his legendary confidence cracked. Judge Patricia Hammond presided, her expression stern as she reviewed the mountain of evidence. We're here for hearings in Davidson versus Davidson, she began, though I note that the validity of this marriage is itself in question. Charles Whitman, Richard's attorney, stood. Your Honor, my client is a pillar of the community. These allegations are part of a vindictive campaign. Mr. Whitman, Judge Hammond interrupted, your client is currently under federal investigation for bigamy, fraud, and insider trading, hardly a pillar of anything except deception. Victoria rose. Your Honor, we have evidence of sustained financial abuse, physical assault, serial infidelity, and bigamy. We're seeking full dissolution of the prenuptial agreement and equitable distribution of all assets, including those hidden offshore. She's lying, Richard exploded, jumping to his feet. This is a money grab. Mr. Davidson, you'll control yourself in my courtroom, Judge Hammond warned. One more outburst and you'll be held in contempt. Victoria called her first witness. We call Ashley Morrison. Ashley took the stand, polished and composed. She'd traded her influencer style for a conservative suit, looking every inch the credible witness. Miss Morrison, how long were you seeing Mr. Davidson? 3 years. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. He told me he and his wife had an open marriage. Ashley continued. He said Margaret knew about us. Did she? No. I realized that when she confronted us at the Four Seasons. Her shock was genuine. Victoria played recordings from Ashley's phone. Richard discussing his plan to frame Margaret, his hidden assets, his contempt for his wife. Richard's face grew redder with each recording. Next came Patricia Newcomb. Her testimony was devastating: the secret marriage, the bigamy, the years of deception. He told me Margaret was his sister, Patricia said. That's why they had the same last name in photos. I believed him for years. Michael Torres testified about the hidden assets, 30 million in offshore accounts. Property in Richard's name alone that should have been marital assets. Fraudulent tax filing spanning 15 years. Then came the most damaging witness, Christopher Newcomb, Richard's 15-year-old son. My dad told me I couldn't exist, Christopher said, his young voice steady, that his real family couldn't know about me. Do you know what that does to a kid, knowing your father is ashamed of you? Richard couldn't look at him. Finally, Margaret took the stand. She sat straight, dignified, meeting Richard's gaze without flinching. For 20 years, I supported his dreams, she said, her voice clear and strong. I raised our children virtually alone while he built his empire. I turned a blind eye to late nights, suspicious charges, obvious lies. I thought I was being a good wife. I was actually enabling a narcissist. Tell us about the night at La Bernardin, Victoria prompted. It was our 20th anniversary. Richard accused me of cheating because I asked about a text. Then he slapped me, in public, in front of dozens of witnesses. How did that make you feel? Margaret considered. Free, for the first time in years. I saw him clearly. Not the successful businessman, not the charming public figure, but the abuser he'd always been. The physical slap just made visible what he'd been doing emotionally for years. Objection, Whitman called. Prejudicial. Overruled. The witness is describing her experience, Margaret continued. I've learned that financial abuse is still abuse. Controlling someone with money, making them dependent, then threatening to take it away, that's abuse. Having affairs while accusing your spouse of cheating, that's abuse. Gaslighting someone until they question their own sanity, that's abuse. You're the abuser, Richard shouted, jumping up again. You've destroyed my life. Judge Hammond banged her gavel. Mr. Davidson, you're in contempt. Bailiff, remove him. As Richard was dragged out, still shouting, Margaret felt 20 years of weight lift from her shoulders. The judge continued without him. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that the prenuptial agreement is void due to fraud and bigamy. Furthermore, given Mr. Davidson's pattern of deception and hidden assets, I'm awarding Mrs. Davidson 70% of all marital assets, including those offshore accounts. Victoria had warned Margaret this might happen, but hearing it still felt surreal. Additionally, Judge Hammond continued, given the evidence of criminal behavior, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for prosecution. As they left the courtroom, FBI agents were waiting. Margaret Davidson. One approached. We need your cooperation in our case against your husband. Ex-husband, Margaret corrected. And yes, I'll cooperate fully. Richard was being led past in handcuffs, heading for federal custody. He stopped, looking at Margaret with desperate eyes. Margaret, please tell them this is a misunderstanding. Margaret looked at the man she'd loved, married, built a life with, the man who'd systematically tried to destroy her. You wanted to monitor my every move, Richard, she said calmly. Now the federal government will monitor yours. As the agents led him away, Margaret heard him say something that almost made her laugh. This isn't fair. Fair? After everything he'd done, he was concerned about fairness. The news cycle exploded. Tech billionaire's double life exposed dominated headlines. Richard's company stock plummeted. The board unanimously voted him out, citing moral turpitude clauses. Margaret gave one exclusive interview to establish her narrative, then retreated from the public eye. She had more important things to focus on. First was her children. Emily and David needed to process their father's betrayal. Margaret arranged therapy, family dinners, honest conversations. I don't even know who he is anymore, David said one evening. My whole life, I tried to make him proud. Now I realize he's incapable of being proud of anyone but himself. He does love you, Margaret said carefully. He just loves himself more. Emily was angrier. He's a sociopath. Mom, you can't make excuses for him. I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to help you understand that his failures aren't your fault. Then there was Christopher, Richard's other son. Margaret did something that shocked everyone she reached out to him. You're my children's brother, she told the teenager over coffee. That makes you family to me, regardless of how you came to exist. Christopher, so much like David in appearance, it was startling, broke down crying. I thought you'd hate me. You're a child. None of this is your fault. Margaret helped Patricia navigate the legal system, ensuring Christopher received proper support. She even invited them to Thanksgiving, over Victoria's warnings about complications. My husband betrayed all of us, Margaret said. We can either let that destroy us or we can build something better from the ruins. Richard's criminal trial began 3 months after the divorce. Margaret testified again, this time in federal court. The charges had expanded wire fraud, tax evasion, insider trading, attempted blackmail. Richard had hired the best criminal defense money could buy, but the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah Williams had done her job too well. Every email, every transaction, every lie was documented. The prosecution presented a pattern of behavior spanning 2 decades. Richard hadn't just deceived Margaret, he'd defrauded investors, manipulated stock prices, bribed officials. Mr. Davidson believed he was above the law, the prosecutor said in closing arguments. He treated people like possessions, rules like suggestions, and marriage like a business transaction. It's time he faced consequences. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Richard was given the opportunity to speak. Margaret watched from the gallery as he stood, expecting the usual denial, deflection, blame. Instead, he turned to her. I destroyed everything good in my life, he said, his voice breaking. Margaret, you deserved better. Our children deserved better. I let greed and ego consume me until there was nothing left but the monster I became. It might have been genuine. It might have been another manipulation. Margaret found she didn't care either way. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole in 7. As Richard was led away, he looked back one last time. Margaret met his gaze steadily, then turned and walked out of his life forever. 6 months after the trial, on a sunny afternoon in Central Park, Margaret sat surrounded by the family she'd rebuilt from the ashes of her marriage. Emily had taken a job at the district attorney's office, prosecuting domestic violence cases. You inspired me, Mom, she said, to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. David was finishing his senior year, planning to study psychology. I want to understand what makes people like Dad tick, he explained, so I can help their victims heal. Even Christopher was there, shy but smiling, slowly building relationships with his half-siblings. Victoria joined them, champagne in hand. The final settlement came through, $50 million, plus both houses, plus the yacht you never wanted. I'm selling the yacht, Margaret laughed, and the penthouse. Too many memories. What about the money, Linda asked, having arrived with her own contribution to their picnic. I'm starting a foundation, Margaret announced, for women escaping financial abuse, free legal services, temporary housing, job training, everything I had access to that most women don't. Mom, that's amazing, Emily said, tears in her eyes. Sarah Williams appeared, as she always seemed to at important moments. I have news. Richard's company. The board wants to hire you as a consultant. They think your insights could help them rebuild their reputation. Margaret considered, then shook her head. I'm done with that world, but thank you. Ashley Morrison approached hesitantly from the path. Margaret had invited her, not expecting her to come. Mrs. Davidson, I wanted to apologize again. Margaret, she corrected, and you have nothing to apologize for. You were a victim too. I'm in therapy now, Ashley said, learning about narcissistic abuse, manipulation tactics. I had no idea how much he'd gotten into my head. It's insidious, Margaret agreed. They make you doubt your own reality until you don't trust your own thoughts. Ashley pulled out an envelope. I wanted to give you this. It's a check for the money Richard gave me. I can't keep it. Margaret pushed it back. Use it for your therapy. Consider it Richard's contribution to your healing. As the afternoon wore on, Margaret found herself walking alone by the reservoir. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The old fear flickered. Richard had contacted her from prison before, using contraband phones. But the message was different. Mrs. Davidson, you don't know me, but your story gave me the courage to leave my husband. Thank you. Margaret stopped walking, tears in her eyes. Another message came through, then another. Your interview saved my life. I thought I was alone until I heard your story. 53 and starting over because of you. She sat on a bench, reading message after message from women who'd found strength in her story. Women who'd recognized their own experiences in hers. Women who'd finally understood that abuse doesn't always leave visible bruises. Victoria found her there an hour later, still reading, still crying. You okay? Margaret showed her the messages. I spent 20 years thinking I was protecting my children by staying silent, but silence protects abusers, not victims. You're helping more people than you know, Victoria said. The DA's office said domestic violence reports are up 30% since your story went public. Not because there's more abuse, but because women are finally feeling empowered to report it. Margaret's phone rang. It was a blocked number from federal prison. Richard, she declined the call. He still doesn't get it, she said. He thinks if he just finds the right words, the right manipulation, he can regain control. Will you ever forgive him? Margaret considered. Forgiveness isn't about him. It's about me. I'll forgive when I'm ready, for my own peace. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean allowing him back into my life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Margaret made her way back to her family. Her real family, the people who'd stood by her, fought for her, believed in her. Emily was laughing at something David said. Christopher was showing Linda photos on his phone. Victoria and Sarah were deep in conversation about their next case. Ashley was there too, slowly finding her place in this unconventional support system. Margaret looked at them all, her children, her friends, even her husband's other victims who'd become her allies. This was what Richard had never understood. Wealth wasn't about money. Success wasn't about power. Family wasn't about blood. It was about connection, support, love that didn't come with conditions or prenups or hidden agendas. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from Patricia Newcomb. Christopher asked if he can call you Mom. I said that's up to you. Margaret smiled, typing back, I'd be honored. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago trapped in a golden cage, accepting crumbs of affection, believing she had no options. That woman felt like a stranger now. At 52, Margaret Davidson was finally free. Free to make her own choices, free to speak her truth, free to help other women find their voices. The slap that had seemed like her lowest moment had become her liberation. Richard had meant to humiliate her. Instead, he'd awakened her. As her family called her over to join them, Margaret took one last look at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere in that maze of buildings, Richard sat in a federal cell, probably still plotting his comeback, still believing he was the victim. Let him. She had better things to do than worry about a narcissistic ex-husband's delusions. She had a life to live, a foundation to build, women to help, and for the first time in 20 years, she had herself, walking toward her family with her head held high. Margaret Davidson, survivor, advocate, and finally free, stepped into her future. The sun set completely as they packed up their picnic, but Margaret didn't feel the darkness. She carried her own light now, and it would never be extinguished again. The auditorium was packed. 300 women, all survivors of domestic abuse, had come to hear Margaret Davidson speak at the third annual gala for the Phoenix Foundation, the organization she'd built from her divorce settlement. Margaret stood at the podium, looking out at faces that mirrored her own journey, pain transformed into power. Victims become victors. 3 years ago, my husband slapped me in a restaurant full of people, she began. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. A murmur went through the crowd. Not because I deserved it, not because violence is ever acceptable, but because it shattered the illusion I'd been living under for 20 years. The illusion that if I just tried harder, loved more, forgave quicker, he would change. She looked at the front row where Emily and David sat, now both working in fields dedicated to helping abuse survivors. Christopher was there too, having legally changed his last name to Davidson with Richard's parental rights terminated. Narcissistic abuse is insidious because it happens gradually. They don't start with slaps. They start with small criticisms, little controlling behaviors, isolation disguised as love, financial control disguised as care. By the time you realize you're in a cage, you've forgotten what freedom feels like. Victoria stood at the side of the stage, now the foundation's legal director. They'd helped over 500 women escape abusive relationships, providing free legal services, safe housing, and financial support. My ex-husband is serving a 12-year sentence for his crimes, Margaret continued. But I'm not here to gloat about his downfall. I'm here to talk about our rise. Every woman in this room who left an abuser, every child who now lives without fear, every life rebuilt from the ashes of a toxic relationship. She saw Ashley in the audience, now a successful advocate herself, running support groups for young women trapped in relationships with older, wealthy men. The phrase millionaire ex-husband appeared in every article about my divorce, Margaret said with a wry smile, as if his wealth was the most important thing about him. But abuse doesn't care about bank accounts. It happens in penthouses and trailer parks, to CEOs and cashiers. Sarah Williams, now the foundation's head of security and investigations, gave her a thumbs up from the back of the room. Financial independence after 50 seemed impossible when I couldn't even access my own bank accounts. Margaret continued, but here's what I learned. Independence isn't about money. It's about knowing your worth. It's about refusing to accept less than you deserve. It's about understanding that being alone is better than being with someone who diminishes you. She talked about the midlife transformation journey, about rediscovering yourself after decades of being defined by someone else's needs, about the power of women supporting women. Some people ask if I regret staying for 20 years. Of course I do, but I can't change the past. I can only use it to help others avoid the same trap. As she concluded her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Margaret stood there, absorbing the moment not for the praise, but for what it represented. 300 women who'd refused to be victims. 300 phoenixes risen from ashes. After the gala, a young woman approached her, nervous and trembling. Mrs. Davidson, I'm currently trying to leave my husband. He's wealthy, connected. He says I'll never win against him in court. Margaret took her hands. That's what they all say. It's their favorite weapon, fear. But here's the truth you've already won by deciding to leave. Everything else is just paperwork. She connected the woman with Victoria, watched as hope replaced fear in her eyes. Later that night, Margaret stood on the balcony of her new apartment, smaller than the penthouse, but entirely hers. The city lights sparkled below, full of stories like hers, women trapped and women breaking free. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Richard in prison. She deleted it without reading. He'd never stopped trying to regain control, but she'd stopped listening long ago. Emily joined her on the balcony. You know what I realized today? Mom, you didn't just survive, Dad. You turned his attempt to destroy you into something that saves other women. That's not just recovery, that's redemption. Margaret hugged her daughter. We all have the power to transform our pain into purpose. It just takes courage to use it. As midnight approached, marking exactly 3 years since that night at La Bernardin, Margaret raised a glass of sparkling water to the sky. Thank you, Richard, she said quietly. Thank you for showing me who you really were. Thank you for forcing me to find who I really am. The Manhattan night embraced her words, carrying them away on the wind. Somewhere, other women were making the same discovery that they were stronger than they knew, braver than they believed, and worthy of so much more than they'd been accepting. Margaret Davidson, 55 years old, millionaire philanthropist, and proof that it's never too late to reclaim your life, went inside to plan tomorrow's battle against abuse. The war wasn't over. It might never be. But tonight, she'd won another victory, and that was enough.